Hi, thanks for joining us today. I'm Nathan Thomas. I'm the General Manager of Amazon Workspaces. I'm joined by Mark Bowker from ESG. We're going to be talking a little bit about desktop as a service, talking a little bit about what customers are doing with that product, see a little bit what their journey looks like, what kind of challenges they're facing, talk a little bit about security and cost implications, a little bit more about that in a bit, but I wanted to start by getting Mark to introduce himself, get a little bit of background about you.
Yeah, thanks, by the way, Nathan, very much for having me here today. So senior analyst, been with ESG for over 13 years. By means of background, I started my career as an IT administrator, then ultimately worked up to an IT director. So this is near and dear to my heart because I was the guy that ran around with the 3.5-inch floppy disks trying to update desktops, and what a pain that was. So thank you very much. How about yourself? I know you've got quite the experience here at AWS as well.
So I've been with Amazon Web Services about 10 years. I did a lot in the Linux space with Amazon Linux and EC2, and have been with Workspaces since we launched in 2014.
Wow.
So a little
fun ride.
Journey. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, I know you guys have been doing a lot of research in the desktop as a service space and kind of cloud and VDI in the cloud. I'd love to understand a little bit more about what's been motivating that. Where are your customers going? What are you guys seeing? And talk a little bit that direction.
Yeah, no, it's one of my favorite topics because it has such an impact to end users inside of companies, as well as really kind of just business workflow and process inside an organization. So it's a topic that's really near and dear because it does touch everybody in the organization. Sometimes you look, if you take IT infrastructure or more data center things, certainly an impact, but not always seen by everybody. And really the touch that desktop delivery, desktop management, desktop security has across everybody is really pretty amazing and has not been easy.
Yeah.
Right?
That's pretty cool to think about. So you've got this difference between the cloud-based services that are APIs or things that developers use. This is stuff that end users use. So everybody who's coming in and doing their job every day has to use that desktop.
And they do. And when they wake up every morning, it's a matter of, whether it's simple things of checking my email, collaborating back and forth between us, using productivity tools, interacting with customers and partners. It really all happens, in a desktop or in your terms, a workspace, right? Yeah. So it's fascinating to watch how something that really has traditionally for many years been very rigid, right?
Yeah.
It's been very predictable, Nathan, right? Here is a device, here is your image or your operating system, here are your applications. And I remember deploying like that. And because it was so predictable, sometimes it meant it was easy to troubleshoot as well. Sometimes it was as easy as, oh, you just need this new driver, or you just need this new update or patch. Or what happened many times is let's just reinstall, right? So we've been looking at things from research perspective to really understand what those challenges are. And looking at things like VDI and DAS and how it's really impacting different decisions out there of how companies may look to change the way that they're really, deploying securely delivering applications and desktops.
Yeah. So you're sort of saying there's a bit of transformation here. Yeah. So it's not just business as usual, right. But it is something where you can get some other benefits for being in the cloud, whether that's security or whether that's manageability or some of those access control capabilities.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So I know in some of the research you've been doing lately, you're going out and surveying customers and starting to gather data. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of questions you're asking? Yeah. What sort of things are you talking to customers about?
Yeah, so it varies, and it's very similar to a lot of things we talked about. One, understanding really what some of the challenges are around traditional desktop delivery and management. It's understanding VDI and DAS in particular. How are companies, what's their usage and interest level in those technologies? Yeah. Then it's ultimately how are those technologies being applied in kind of a real world business setting, not just, I'll say, experimenting in the background, right?
Right.
And then it's really, okay, what are some gaps that those technologies may not close in on today, and how can they kind of fulfill something in the future. So it's really the focus in those areas.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, let's talk a little bit about that kind of initial question set you're going out in terms of usage. What are you hearing around? What are customers doing with desktop as a service that's kind of beyond test and into production?
So let's just back up for a second. Just bear with me. So VDI for a second, right?
Yes, sure.
Been around for a bit.
Yes.
I remember the days we cover server virtualization inside the data center. All of a sudden, everybody got caught up on, oh, well, desktop's just a workload. And I may have virtualized hundreds of virtual machines or servers, but my goodness, now I've got tens of thousands of desktops, and what a great opportunity. And everybody's going to switch over that way.
Yeah.
Never happened, right? It's happened in niche kind of scenarios. It's happened, like we see it in industries where healthcare, maybe it's kind of this mobile cart scenario. See it in universities, maybe it's a lab type of scenario. But the fact that everybody was using VDI for, mass employees has just never really happened.
Yeah, definitely.
So, but what we do see is the majority of customers are using it in some extent. So usually roughly around, our research will show kind of typically around 80% are either using or interested in VDI. DAS has really gotten interesting.
Yeah.
So that, when we ask about that question, 77% of our respondents are either using or interested. And we can get into why one would choose one over the other. But I think the fascinating news is the interest level is there. Yep. Now it's just a matter of how are people going to take their, I'll say, experimentation in VDI. And it has been that in some cases. And really look how DAS may either replace it, augment it, and other pieces, right?
That matches pretty closely to what we see with workspaces as well in that desktop as a service market, where a lot of times we do talk to customers who've got VDI background, but a lot of times we're really talking about people who don't, or if they do have VDI background, this is a totally different project. So they're starting a new thing that's desktop as a service focused. And there's a bunch of different reasons that that's the case, but it turns out that what we hear from customers is a lot of times the kind of complexity they were trying to solve with all those devices, owning the machine, owning the configuration, setting up and managing that thing. When you move it into VDI and into the data center, you've shifted where the problem is, but it's the same type of problems, right? So you've still got disk contention, and you're running out of CPU, and you've got inadequate networking, and you've got to upgrade and maintain the machines that are servers now instead of laptops, but it's the same kind of problem. And so
you moved it.
That's right. And so desktop as a service seems to provide that core value prop that was promised from VDI, which is being able to do this kind of decoupling of the device and the end user from those data and apps, but in a way that means you don't have to take on all that infrastructure management. Yeah,
and you're right on. So I think a lot of the promise of VDI was let's reduce operational costs.
Yeah.
And our research shows that, it was a perceived benefit that never happened. And then the next one is, well, let's reduce capital costs, maybe looking at it from a device perspective.
Right.
But no, just what you said, it shifted. Now, early on in VDI, that provided a tremendous market for a lot of the infrastructure providers, right?
Yes.
They saw that and they said, here we go. We had server virtualization. We sold all this infrastructure in VDI. We're going to be able to sell a lot more. And that happened to some extent, right?
Yeah.
People came out with, let's use the capacity that we already have. Let's have reference architecture. Let's use some hyper-converged type of piece to kind of get it even more streamlined. But what they found out ultimately is just what you said. Well, now I still have to manage it. I still have to operate it. And we even saw examples. I had one customer once said, IT operations kind of went off and did this VDI project.
Yeah.
And then, actually, it wasn't IT operations, more of a help desk kind of scenario. And then IT operations got a hold of it and said, wait a second. If one of these servers go down or something, all of a sudden, understand, you're going to put the lights out on everybody.
Totally.
And they pushed back. That stopped their VDI project altogether.
Yeah, the risk and concern.
Exactly.
Well, in kind of a weird way, running the workspaces service, I actually do have this problem myself, right? Which is that we have to manage all the desktops for everybody. But what's great is we get to build on top of this incredible AWS infrastructure, right? So every workspace is a dedicated virtual machine that's an EC2 instance, which means it's getting dedicated RAM, it's getting dedicated network, it's getting dedicated disk. It's got this incredible consistency of experience, which is very different than these old shared session, cram in as many things as you can into a piece of hardware models that VDI had. We get to build on top of this incredibly consistent EBS solution for our storage. We get a global infrastructure of all of the data centers that AWS has. And so a huge number of those problems that existed really we're taking on, but then of course it's a lot easier to do and manage at AWS scale.
Yep, absolutely.
So a little bit different. So what are you hearing from customers in terms of challenges, right? So they're seeing this interest in doing it, but obviously there's some amount of effort that goes into making those migrations.
Yeah, no, some of the challenges in general, we'll just kind of start with the high challenges. There's still troubleshooting challenges on the desktop exist and are a tremendous amount of manpower that has to be thrown at that.
Yeah.
So still number one challenge. The change or the pace of change in technology, people show up with different devices, different business units buy different applications from all over the places, right? Yep. Devices, change fast. So now all of a sudden that predictable environment I talked about earlier is no longer predictable. Yeah. I've got users that still want to work from different locations across different devices and still want to do work. Yeah. So that is another one that's that pace of change. And then the other one, it may sound boring, but simple things, updating and patching.
Yeah, interesting.
Right? Just a simple thing that when I was in IT 20 years ago, was a challenge, and that challenge still exists today. Yeah. So there's a primary challenge that still exists overall.
Yeah, we see some similar patterns on the workspaces side. We actually offer workspaces with two different models. Mm-hmm. One is a license included model, so you get the workspaces that include typically the server operating systems with a desktop experience on them. Yep. And then the other model is bring your own license. So that is you bring your own client OS in and you operate under existing Microsoft DA agreements. Now, of course, we also offer Linux.
Of course,
thinking about the Windows side. And so in the license included model, we do all the patching for you, right? So it just comes up, it patches, it handles that. On the BYOL side, though, we hear the same story. Customers are still doing the patching themselves and updating and maintaining that. I do think the difference is that it's a little different when that workspace is always accessible to you as an IT administrator compared to a laptop that somebody closes and walks out the door.
How do I get access to it?
You don't get access, right? With a workspace, even if it's an auto stop workspace, which hibernates when it's not in use to save money, you can start it back up as an admin. You can patch it. You can shut it back down. So it winds up being a little bit more approachable. But there's definitely still that same vibe.
And users really look at that. I mean, how excited does a user get to get that out of the box brand new experience? Yeah. And how quickly do they say, well, my device never works like the first day I opened it up? Yeah. But I definitely see that. And I saw some of that in VDI. Mm-hmm. They were getting that new out of the box experience all the time. Yes. It's the same thing with desktop as a service. Yeah. They're always getting the latest patched, latest version that they're working on. And they're truly getting that. Oh, it's not being slowed down by whether it's application compatibility, antivirus, whatever it may be on that workspace is really something they're truly getting that better experience. And that's definitely one of the bigger drivers of desktop as a service that we see.
Interesting. One of the strange things that we see is, particularly with customers that are running always on workspaces, it turns out there's a lot of startup costs that these desktops go through. If you close a laptop, open it back up, Outlook is going to be going and checking for doing mail. It's going to be sorting on that mail. It's going to be pulling down information. With an always on workspace, it's just always running. You log in and immediately are interactive and everything is working at the natural pace. And so it is that just some subtle benefits that seem to happen there.
We say, you and I are close to it, so we say it's subtle, but that's a big deal. Yeah. Right? I mean, I've seen companies, and this happens in healthcare a lot, where the logon process is measured in minutes. Yeah. Suddenly it's measured in minutes, and they look at that as, wait a second, that impacts my patient care. That impacts the number of patients I can see a day. Mm-hmm. And suddenly they do this math, and that's driven newer solutions like desktop as a service. So we may say it's not, but people, and the other thing is people are used to accessing. People now are becoming used to accessing like that. Yeah. So if I take my consumer experience, right? I take my 14-year-old son who opens up a device and it's instantly on go. Yeah. There's not hold on, I've got to log on and, let me go get my coffee. So there's an expectation, I think, of, today's users that happens.
That's right. Yeah. And so we've got always on workspaces that kind of fit that user model. And if you want to save some money and you're willing to accept a little bit of login time, then you have the auto stop workspace. Right. So I know one of the areas you really pushed on with customers was around security. And so looking at both what are the security implications of desktop as a service, and then what are the actions that they're taking in terms of taking advantage. So I'd love to hear about what you're hearing.
Yeah, so basically what I hear is the security perimeters disappeared. It's vaporized because, right, everybody's coming in with these different applications and devices.
Interesting.
So now, how do I protect that? Now I'm in trouble because now I used to have a device that I knew. It was connected to a network that I owned, right? People used to, even if they were on a home network or something, they'd VPN in. So I still own that VPN connection.
Yeah.
Now I can predictably manage that. Now suddenly, wait a second, is this a corporate-owned device? Is it a personally owned device that's corporately managed? Is it a part of a BYOD program?
Yeah.
Is this, somebody's home computer that they're on their personal internet with? Yeah. And how am I going to manage all that, which has become extremely difficult?
Yeah.
Then we've got the other side of things, right? Consistently in ESG research, we find that security is a number one issue inside of an organization. It's a number one investment inside of organizations because of all the bad things that are happening, right? There's true criminals out there that are ultimately trying to gain access to Nathan or Mark's information, and personal or business-wise. So now as an IT owner and professional, what do I do? Yeah. Now I've got this larger perimeter that I don't have control of, and how do I deal with that? So that is top of mind. Yeah. And what's interesting, what we saw in the research, so we definitely saw about 36% of the folks said that security was very important. But what's very interesting, 77% of those folks that had deployed DAS found that security was very important. So they're starting to map together the importance of security and securely delivering apps and data to a cloud-hosted desktop service. Being able to match, all right, I can improve my security by having my desktops hosted here that I can then apply additional services to and have more of that predictable experience that I can manage. Yeah,
that sounds pretty familiar to me as well. So with workspaces, I'd say we kind of see two different patterns. So in all cases, the value prop that we hear that people value for workspaces is around none of my data goes and lives on a local device. So it's not on a laptop, it's not on the mobile clients, it's just not there.
Trust nothing almost, right?
That's right. And so, but we do see this dichotomy of there are customers that still do MDM and mobile device management and view those client components as trusted. But then we have another category of customers who said, no, the client is completely untrusted. And for those folks, their security perimeter really becomes their VPC, their virtual private cloud. So things like wireless access points in buildings, physical ports in buildings, those are untrusted. Right. It's just once you authenticate into your workspace, that workspace is connected into the VPC.
That's right.
And so I've done TLS auth processes. I'm doing encrypted streaming on the data. And so at that point, that's really the security perimeter. And I think that's incredibly powerful. Customers absolutely pivot to saying, look, I don't care if those devices get left in bars. There's no data on them. Right. It's just not a thing that I care about anymore.
Yeah, no, I see the same thing. And I think that's ultimately what you're explaining is ultimately where people want to get to, right? Let's face it, it's not that easy sometimes. It's very easy, and I've done it personally, to spin up a AWS workspace. So that's very simple. But to take my population of end users, and let's just face it, I'm sure you see this too, is it's not just my end users in my company. It may be a set of contractors. It may be a set of business partners. In some cases, it may be customers of that business. Yeah. And being able to holistically look at my desktop environment and just flip a switch isn't always easy, right? Because they're looking at things such as, you mentioned it, security. They're looking at application compatibility. Right. They're looking at, what is that device endpoint that they're using? Yeah. So I think what I typically see in that scenario is similar to what you're seeing, but there's a little bit of a crawl, walk, run scenario as well. Yeah. Let's try it for this business scenario or this use case. Right. Let's see the experience we have. And then ultimately, once they realize, wow, we can start to apply this to other areas of the business as well.
Right. And what we've seen is some of that's intentional in terms of a plan, and some of it's kind of not, right? Yeah. So the first workspace enablement that's corporate connected, I think, is the most important for them. Yep. So that is, to be crystal clear, the workspaces can be domain joined into your Active Directory, and then I can have VPC access, down a DX link, for example, and or VPN link into your intranet, and getting that stuff set up, being able to onboard end users, being able to handle the help desk support for that, know what you're going to do with that. Once that's in place, what we find is that, yes, there may be some workloads they knew about, but it's really more about the workloads they didn't know about. So suddenly we bought a company, or we had an acquisition, we're spinning up an office, we've got a new business unit, and they need 50 desktops or 100 or 1,000. And in the past, they had choices of, hey, I'm going to go buy a bunch of new laptops, or I'm going to go to VDI. Exactly. And so there's an element for us, which is just, hey, as long as you guys get it in place, then the growth kind of comes naturally for a lot of people when they get to those points where they just need it, right?
Yeah, no, and I 100% agree. The other thing that I think is interesting to call out is VDI I've seen be used, as I was saying before, in certain use case scenarios to kind of say, we can do better. In some cases, we just want to repurpose a device, right? We don't want to refresh what that hardware is. So we just want to repurpose what that device is. Sometimes it was to a different set of users. So that is that's worked to a limited capacity. What our research showed, though, is the exact folks inside the organization that are having a more dynamic work style, such as a mobile worker, an executive, is exactly where we see DaaS being used.
Interesting.
Right? So VDI may have been applied more to a task worker. I've got a call center. I've got a cookie cutter desktop. We're going to put a thin client on there.
That's right.
Boom, 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 boom. Done. We just kind of cookie cutter that out. But where we saw DaaS being applied inside the research was really more towards this, hey, we're changing the work style. The devices they use is different. And really, and we've seen this, right? It's the executives that showed up years ago with that tablet that said, make this work for my email, essentially. So that's what's kind of interesting about DaaS, right? It's being applied to more of those kind of, I'd say more important things inside the business.
Well, I think most importantly, those are people with a voice, right?
Absolutely.
I think there's been an element where VDI was sort of, okay, there's a group of people who, don't necessarily have a lot of say. We can force them to do the VDI, but our developers or our executives who, really we have to listen to what they say, don't get VDI.
That's right.
And so it's a testament to some degree that I think that the DaaS experience is so much stronger that folks are accepting of that. You've got those vocal customers who've got to be satisfied with what they're doing. And so we've got a lot of customers that do opt-in. So it's, effectively a choice that people can join. That becomes incredibly incumbent upon the service provider to deliver something people like to use, right? It can't just be something
spread the word
down. Yeah, exactly. It's not a financial decision. It's not just because you're a consultant. It's actually something people have to like. So a little different in that regard. So now you guys did a little bit of look at kind of financial perceptions as well, right? So I'd love to understand what you're hearing from customers on is getting to a cheaper place a core goal for these folks, or is really the security and the value on the proposition around access and mobility more critical than that? And what kind of things have customers said to you?
So truthfully, it all matters, right?
Yeah, of course.
I mentioned earlier that the perceived benefits of VDI around operational and capital expenditures weren't being met, right? There was kind of a driver towards that way. It flips a bit with desktop as a service. We're seeing those operational expenditures and capital expenditures actually, they're recognizing, reduced OPEX and CAPEX. That's something that we hadn't seen with VDI. But more importantly, I think it's what's interesting is they're aligning desktop as a service with an overall cloud initiative. So what we've seen happen, even outside this research, a lot of folks are having, a cloud-first initiative inside their organization with a lot of new applications that come in, whether it's a new server workload or desktop workload. And what they're starting to align with is, all right, desktop as a service is really part of our, I'll say, IT and business strategy. So then when it comes down to the economics of the desktop as a service, they're able to map it to those overall company and business initiatives, which is, I think, is the big difference too. Where VDI at the end of the day was really hey, you've got to justify why that may be better. And, oh, by the way, can you write the check for this infrastructure that we need as well? Where desktop as a service is very much okay, we're already at this point in our cloud journey and still maybe very at the beginning. Look at this solution that also aligns with how we deliver our apps and desktops. And now that's typically where the conversation goes with desktop as a service.
Yeah, definitely. That makes a lot of sense. We get this sense from talking to customers that there's this pent up sense of needing to transform desktop, right, or transform end user computing.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit before about kind of the complexity and thinking about security posture, but across the board, I feel like the cognitive load requirements on IT these days are way higher than they used to be, right? So, as you pointed out, you've got people coming with all kinds of devices, all kinds of operating systems, all kinds of network boundaries and ways that they're connecting.
Right.
And so, as they're watching the rest of the things that their company does go to the cloud, they're watching their desktops just sit on laptops still. And so they know that there's an end user gap where there's sort of this sense that the customers want something more, that you got the security gap. And so they're kind of desperate for some kind of transformation that says, here's a vision of how you get this thing to a place where it's more manageable, more secure. And I think desktop as a service is kind of hitting that market right at that point, which is nice.
It is. Yeah, no, I think my observation is similar. I think that you start to recognize, one, how quickly you can have a desktop as a service, I'll say image, available to you. Mm-hmm. So whether you have a developer or you have a, business partner that you're working with, or an employee that's just a knowledge worker, that's a new hire, for example, I can have that service available, let's say measured truly in minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When it came, in the past, we measured those type of scenarios in days, sometimes weeks.
Yeah.
Now, I remember I would unbox a laptop. I'd have 50 of them, not 50, but probably 15 of them spread out, and you were imaging them all for the new users. That was a significant consumption of time.
We have customers just spend 1,000 in a day. It's fine.
Yeah.
That happens.
And when it comes down to it, too, the minute you give that to the end user, there's a little bit of a, now what's going to happen from here? Mm-hmm. What are they going to install on their own? What are they going to have their kids do on it?
Yeah.
And it kind of runs the gamut of what they could do.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's interesting where desktop as a service is now a predictable environment. It's going to be easier to manage for them, and it's a predictable experience for the end user as well.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of, I'd say the timing is good.
Yeah.
Right? I think that companies tried with VDI. Mm-hmm. And I think, honestly, that did work in some scenarios.
Yeah.
But when it comes, I've got a question a lot now. When it comes to let's scale VDI, are you going to purchase additional infrastructure, and why would you do that, right?
Yeah.
There are good scenarios I can understand, right? If there's certain governance or there's certain kind of corporate mandate, there are some points there that are valid. Yeah. But if it really comes down to, looking at their VDI environment, it becomes very valuable to look at a cloud service to really take and ultimately consume that from.
So you talked a little bit about the challenge before patching. I'm curious, when you look at the VDI market, look at the desktop as a service market, putting on your futurist hat for just a minute.
Oh boy.
Is there anything you kind of look at and say, there's a gap here that needs to be filled, and I would, sort of expect that folks are going to be filling it in the desktop as a service space?
I think that some of it is education. So some of it is simple things. We're very close to this. So it's some things just simple as, do I need to be connected? Like some people don't get the scenario. Guys like you and I and a lot of people may travel for a living. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? So I think there's an education gap of what that means from that perspective. The other thing that this is kind of where I put my futuristic hat on a little bit. So why doesn't it come to the point where Windows may be just an app? Right? So I have a workspace, a environment that I'm log into, I authenticate into. Mm-hmm. And then, I've got Windows as my app, which is a desktop that ultimately may have applications associated with it. Yeah. But I've got other applications that I use to do my job. Yeah. And they are not locally installed on my Windows image, right? Are they installed on a Linux image? Are they installed in software as a service? So I think that is ultimately what fascinates me, where you kind of say, Windows becomes just an app of an overall workspace or desktop.
Interesting. So literally the decomposition approach.
Yeah.
Right? So you start to have a little bit more flexibility in pricing or scaling or those kind of things.
You got it.
Fascinating concept.
You got it.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the end of the day, where do you feel like the future is for VDI? Do you feel like this is a market that's continuing to existing outside of DAS, or?
Let's be fair. I don't anticipate, in 2019, everybody's going to go shut off their VDI because DAS is so good.
Yeah.
I think that it will exist. I think in cases, we've even seen long tail with application virtualization, right? Back in the days where I just had an application I needed to ultimately stream into a desktop.
Yeah.
That technology has been around for over 20 years.
Definitely.
And we've seen that technology not always get upgraded. So kind of, it works, don't touch that, right?
Definitely.
So I think with VDI, you're going to see where there's a certain scenario where they'll continue to use it for the scenario that they've used it for. But I think that DAS will be looked at as an alternative if they want to have to buy new VDI licenses, if they have to buy any type of infrastructure to support it.
Yeah.
And the other one that I think it will be looked at, and we touched upon it, is from a security perspective, right? I think the strength I see growing around security and DAS, I think is something that's a bit of an unknown.
Yeah.
And I think if it comes down to, even if let's say the price is equal of a VDI image versus DAS image, if there's a strength and security posture of that DAS image, which I believe there is, and it will continue to get stronger, I think the decision may actually tip over from a security perspective.
Interesting. Yeah, we certainly see a lot of existing VDI customers moving to the cloud as well.
Sure.
Right. So folks are taking Citrix and VMware workloads and moving them into EC2 in those environments. And
good for you, but I mean, they're still moving the problem a little bit.
They are.
Right?
They are.
I think it's great for you.
I do think that there's some of it that is transitioning the problem, which is you still got to manage that infrastructure yourself.
Very
but
fair.
you are out of the capital business, which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
You get the advantage of all of that EC2 infrastructure, EBS infrastructure, and networking. So, we work with customers on the workspaces side regularly who do both.
Sure.
And there are typically operational overlaps or overlaps in the teams that are doing both of those things. So pretty common in that sense. So definitely going to be interesting to watch for the future and see how that plays out, though.
It will. I mean, at the end, look at what ultimately businesses are trying to accomplish. They want Nathan or Mark to walk into the business and work.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what the device is, right? And they want to make sure that as Nathan and Mark work, it's a secure environment. So whether we're working on something, they don't want something, my credentials compromised. God forbid, data stolen, any of those type of things to happen.
Yeah.
So it's really about how can I create that environment where a new employee can show up with, maybe it is a corporate owned device still, to your point, but it could be a device that I walk in of my choice. And I can have that experience I'm having on the consumer side and ultimately still be able to get my work done. And I think there's a lot changing there. I think that, let's face it, the devices we're walking around in our pockets today, you and I probably aren't going to have those a year from now. We're going to switch, right? Because that's the way we work.
We do it, although evidence would suggest we're having more devices. I know I have more different access points, not less over time.
So that's interesting. So I may have a difference of opinion there. I say, if you can have a desktop in the cloud that has my workspace with my Windows application, software as a service type applications, maybe I need less devices.
You need them, but somehow I now have a phone and a tablet and 2 laptops and a desktop.
I agree. I know.
I don't have an explanation.
But if you have, what if you could take your phone now and dock it to a monitor, right? Yeah. And we're seeing some of that, right?
We see some of the Samsung decks.
You got it. That's a great example. So now, what if I truly can do that and have the ability to have truly, that phone is pretty powerful. So now I've got the situation where I can dock that to a keyboard and monitor in my home office, in my work office. It's a little bit funny if I travel, but I think there's solutions that can certainly address that. Yeah. But I'm in the same boat as you, by the way. I have more devices every day. Some of it's just because I like them. But if I think of it, if I was back in IT, I'd be looking for ways to drive less devices, right? I drive down risk. I drive down everything.
Certainly the amount of devices that my company is going to provide to me, I don't think is going to increase, right? But what is your take on bring your own device? That seems like, again, in the VDI, sort of, it's all right around the corner, but every time you really dig into an IT infrastructure, people get scared and there's security risk and there's all kinds of other issues. Are people actually doing it?
So everybody has a program. I say everybody. Most companies I talk to have some type of program. But then I've got to scratch my head for a second. I say, okay, well, you got a program, but you have 2 phones. Yeah. So why do you have 2 phones? Oh, I would never let the company
have MDM.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, this is why I really do like this idea that the security perimeters in the VPC, and you really should be trusting of nothing outside of that. Just don't do it. So obviously that means trusting that the Workspaces client is doing the right thing for connectivity in our case.
That's the magic, right?
But that's really the magic. That's the idea. So very straightforward in that sense. So. Well, Mark, we've covered a lot of ground.
Great.
You have any questions for me on the Workspaces side? I don't know. I've been asking you with questions over and over again.
I think what would be great is just to understand a little bit more of, what are some of those top drivers you're seeing at customers, and then I think it'd be good to understand from you, what's it take to get started, right? You kind of mentioned, hey, what's going to happen with VDI? But all right, Nathan, you got me convinced now. Okay. What do I do to get started? What's it take?
Yeah, the value proposition for our customers is, right where we've been talking all day. So it's the idea for customers that they begin to have desktops that they manage a little bit more like a server environment. Sure. So security posture begins to look more like a security server environment. You begin to decouple that from your physical infrastructure on hardware, so you're not having to do CapEx. You're not having to do some of those expenditures and management attributes. And it's super flexible. So the business flexibility winds up being this huge chunk of the value. So I can spin it up when I need it. I can shut it off when I'm done with it. And so there's a cognitive load that goes down in that sense, which is really powerful. And so we see people adopting it a lot. In these cases, we kind of call edge of enterprise, which is places like consultants or outside labor forces or folks who are mobile workers or transient workers or people who are coming on and coming off the payroll. And it's just because it makes sense. You don't have to go and buy gear, keep gear, get rid of gear, manage it, all those things. And so then that expands into people using it for traditional knowledge worker use cases. So a lot of different kind of stories there. But at the end of the day, it is about kind of that core flexibility, security, and then cost consciousness for the customers. As particularly as they make that cloud journey. So it's trying to make it. In terms of getting started, pretty simple. So if you go to the AWS console and you have an AWS account, you can launch a workspace typically in 15, 20 minutes.
I've done it.
Okay.
Even my rusty IT skills,
very good. I was able to do it. And so when you do that, there's really two paths. You can go down a road of using a quick start, or you can set everything up yourself. If you do the quick start, it'll stand up a simple Active Directory for you. It'll stand up the VPC environments that you need. It'll launch your workspace. And then you have to download a client. So you'll get an email that tells you where to download the client. Put in the registration code so it knows which workspace environment to connect to, and then log in. If you're on that corporate side, you would kind of go that other track of manually setting it up. So specify your existing VPC, make sure those rules are in place for access, connect it to your Active Directory using Active Directory Connector, so you can just use your existing username and password. And then get your VPN connected or Direct Connect link connected if you're going to be going into your corporate network on site. So kind of two paths, but pretty simple for folks to get started and at least try it in kind of 15, 20 minutes, which is nice.
Well, that's the name of the game, right? Just to kind of get it up and working so they see immediate value. And it's interesting. I've seen scenarios specifically with workspaces where developers just spun it up really fast because they needed things for maybe a QA process or just needed to test something and needed that available, where IT would come to them and say, well, come to us next week, maybe we'll be ready.
Totally.
So I've seen in that scenario. And then I have seen scenarios where people have looked and say, let's do a bigger switch over to DAS. And it's a little bit more involved just because you're right. They have an existing environment that needs to be integrated, right? If I suddenly have a user log on and they can't see the files that they used to have access to, right? The shared drive, right?
Yeah, you need the network access.
Yeah,
it's really a hybrid solution for those enterprise environments, right? So you're using all those same things you always use. And it was really a core goal when we built it was, we don't have to tell you that you go restart with a new directory or you restart with your SCCM management tools. It's just a Windows box that's domain joined or a Linux box that's domain joined. So pretty straightforward for most people who have that background.
From who you're ultimately having the conversations with, are you seeing, we talk a lot about security, and I'm just thinking, are you seeing the security teams lean in with those type of decisions?
Yeah, we really do see two different stories. I hate to give that answer. We see folks who really get that clarity. And so they say, look, I want the posture assessment of a workspace. So I like that kind of controlled environment. And particularly saying things like, look, if I've got a consumer who's an end user today and I'm giving them a laptop, the expectation is they're going to be doing things from that laptop that are both personal and corporate. Absolutely. And so there's an element where they have to open up the perimeter a little bit to allow that to happen and not get a certain amount of mutiny from those employees. Yeah. With a workspace, you don't worry about that. The workspace is the corporate environment. You lock that down, block the ports, block what you can access. They've got a device they're connecting from. That thing can have more open and permissive networking. And you don't care if it's got some sort of exploit. It's not really yours, right? So we see that story and people who get that. But then we also see the other, which is, folks who still have a certain fear of data going into the cloud or things migrating. I understand that. There is a certain element of feeling like proximity to your data is an element of security.
Data huggers.
That's right. But at the end of the day, as a company, of course, AWS is a pretty significant investment and resource in security focus. Yeah. And I think at a scale that really any individual company kind of can't apply to the problem because we're aggregating that demand in a way. Yeah. And so we're very deeply focused on that as a company.
No, I think that's important, right? I mean, let's face it, any business out there today is going to experience some type of, whether it's a true breach in security or some new criminal actor out there, that's an everyday occurrence. Yeah. And, when you have a company like AWS kind of that's got your back in some sense here, that makes a difference because a lot of companies, may not have the skill set. Right. And maybe just skill set alone. I don't have the skill set to have that burden on me day in and day out where I'm not sleeping, at night. And I think that's an important factor that people miss. The traditional desktop, I'm responsible. The VDI, to our point, I just moved the problem, but I'm still responsible. Yeah. Now I move to a provider that, can truly, whether it's share threat intelligence and just share overall security intelligence. Mm-hmm. Now, I can breathe a little bit easier. And I think that's my point, right? The kind of tipping point is really comes down to security in many cases.
Yeah, that's entirely true. Yeah. Well, Mark, I really appreciate you taking the time to come and chat today. It's been really great. A lot of good insights. I know your research is available at ESG.
Absolutely is, yeah.
Customers can engage with that pretty directly.
They can.
And then, as mentioned, if folks want to get started with Amazon Workspaces, pretty easy to go to the console and make that launch happen. So we really encourage everybody to get going with that. With that, I think we'll wrap up. Thanks a lot again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.